Is UFC commentator Joe Rogan right about what should be next for Islam Makhachev? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. My name is James Lynch. So I know we're about a week out since Islam's last performance against Ian Garry, retaining the title. And there was an interesting clip at the end of the broadcast from Rogan talking about what should be next for the welterweight champion Islam Makhachev. So we're going to go have a quick listen to this. Then we're going to talk about what should be next for Islam Makhachev. So here is Joe Rogan, courtesy of Fight Wisdom, talking about what should be next for Islam Makhachev. Let's play the clip here right now.
To Justin Gaethje. Look at what he did to Dustin Poirier. Look at what he did to Charles Oliveira.
I mean, even Moicano, it was like a round.
Just crushes him when he gets on top of him. This is the difference between him at 155 and him at 170. And you know, I mean, I understand what he wants to do, and I understand that he wants it, but man, if I was in his corner,
it's hard.
I'd be like, maybe.
It's hard to tell, man, that is the
Look at what he did to.
Yeah, so you can see in this clip here, Rogan is kind of talking about how when Islam was at 155, you know, he was finishing fights. He looked a little bit more dominant than he has at 170. His two appearances at 170 have both been decisions. The last fight with Ian Garry. I mean, again, I had people in my live chat last week saying that Ian Garry won the fight. It was much closer. In fact, Garry actually did outland Islam 29-22 in significant strikes. Obviously, the big difference in the fight was the 7-15 takedowns from Islam. And also, I bring this up time and time again, I mean, the biggest part of this fight was Islam head kicking Garry, and that was the most significant part of the fight. So I think the decision was right. I don't have an issue with that, but it was maybe a bit closer for comfort for Islam, right? If you look at most of his performances, like if we go back and look at his tenure at lightweight, the only fight that was somewhat close was the Alex Volkanovski fight. The rest of these were finishes, and they were pretty dominant wins for the most part. Now, some of this had to do with opposition that he fought. Some of these earlier fights like Arman and Davy Ramos were decisions as well, as far as the performances that Islam's had. But overall, he's been much more dominant at 155, at least recently, than he has been at 170. So that's the big debate here. Should Islam move back down to 155? Again, I think there's a case for it in terms of the fact that it may be a bit easier, but I want to remind people as well, if we look at some of those weight cuts for Islam Makhachev, and I mean, I can go dig up some videos, but he didn't look so good. It looked like he was cutting a lot of weight to make the limit of 155. In fact, if we go back and look at the weigh-in he had for Dustin Poirier as an example, so Islam Makhachev weighs in for Dustin Poirier, or even go look at maybe the actual footage there. Look how drained Islam is here. You can see it. I mean, I don't have to show you the actual video here, but he was cutting a lot. And I know that was a big thing about him moving up, was that, you know, how much longer could he do the weight cut? And Islam kind of falls in that age range right now at 34. He's going to be 35 in October. It's probably not the best to be cutting that much weight later in his career. So while I do agree with Rogan that his performances have been more dominant at 55 against some pretty good opposition, with that comes the tough weight cut, and how many times can he do that? Obviously at 170, if we look at the most recent weigh-in here with Ian Garry, you'll see here, looks a lot healthier, right? I mean, that's just a little small sample size there, but you look at Islam there, he looks much better. He's not sucked in, looks like it's a good weight. Obviously, he's still cutting weight, but not as much as he is there. So that's one thing to factor in too. The other thing we got to talk about is if Islam moved down to 155, what are the options? What are the fights? And are these fights that would be worth it for Islam Makhachev? So let's go have a quick look at that. So if we look here at lightweight, you can see that obviously, you know, a fight that's still big and obviously wouldn't happen next is Ilia Topuria. That's still a massive fight. If you look at the two fan bases, we look at the fact that both their managers don't like each other. I did a couple of videos on this about, kind of the back and forth there. There's a lot at stake there. So the Topuria fight is still huge. Gaethje's still a big fight, right? Like Gaethje's the current title holder. That to me is a winnable fight for Islam Makhachev. And yes, Justin Gaethje's coming off a huge upset. And I'm not saying Justin Gaethje can't beat Islam, but I think if we're capping that fight on paper, Islam would probably win that fight. So there we go. That's a winnable fight for him. Is it a winnable fight against Ilia? I mean, I think even before Ilia's loss, I think that was a winnable fight for Islam in the sense that I think Islam's more well-rounded. Now, could he take a punch from Ilia Topuria? That's a separate story here. But I think overall, what you're seeing is again, another winnable fight there for Ilia. Now, Arman Tsarukyan, is that a winnable fight? Their first fight a couple years back, if we go look at it there, close. I mean, Islam obviously won. There's a lot of context that we got to use here as well. Remember, Islam was supposed to fight someone else. Arman took that on short notice. He did go 5 rounds in that fight. And I think actually, if you go look at the stats on that fight, I want to say the strikes were fairly close. If we look at it there, 14-13. So I think there is a world where it would be interesting to see Islam and Arman fight again. So again, that's another fun rematch that they could do. And that would be a fairly close fight. But again, I think Islam's favored there overall. Charles Oliveira. First fight was a total beatdown from Islam on there. But Oliveira, since then, he's done quite well. I think the only loss is there to Arman. And then I think Arman's the only loss that he's had, right? In between there. That's a rematch I still think is a very big fight that you could put together, right? So those are some things to kind of consider as well, right? Since that, I guess he's lost to Arman and then he lost to Ilya as well. He got knocked out by Ilya in that fight. But even at Oliveira's age here at 36, that's still an interesting fight. And again, maybe a winnable fight there for Islam as well. And when I say winnable, I mean he can win. That doesn't mean that Oliveira can't win. I'm just saying he would be favored in that one. There's a fresh matchup, Max Holloway. That's a fairly big fight too. Paddy Pimblett would be a big fight. Again, another fight I think that Islam would be favored. Quillen Salkill, that could also be a big fight considering what Quillen has done over the last little bit here. Emerging as a star too. We still have never seen Benoit Saint Denis in Islam. So you're seeing here, there's a lot of options, a lot of big fights from at 155. And if we want to use the Rogan argument, could Islam look even better in these fights than he would if he stayed at 170? I think that's worth at least discussing here. My personal view on this, just to cut to the chase, I don't think Islam should move back down. I don't think it usually goes better for fighters when they get older and they're cutting a lot of weight. Not to say that Islam would lose those fights, but why put your body through that when you can fight in a weight class where you're very capable of winning? Yes, the fights are closer, as we've seen here with obviously the Gary fight. I mean, the JDM fight was a bit more dominant in that regard. But again, I think for Islam and his health, I think it's better for him to compete at 170. Like, I look at him at 170, and I know some people feel like maybe he's shorter and he's not long enough, but I look at a guy that does seem like he fits in well with the weight class. So I personally don't think he should move down to 155, even though, like I just pointed out, there's a lot of not only big fights, but winnable fights for Islam in those weight classes too. Let's look at the options at 170, even though I've kind of already shown my hand here and given you my answer, but let's look at some of the options, right? You've got Carlos Prates as a potential option here. Thing I wonder, and I've said this before, I do wonder, can Islam take a punch like that at 170? That's one thing we haven't seen. Listen, JDM, yes, he has power. Does he have one punch knockout power? Not really. We haven't really seen that from JDM in a lot of his fights. Not against good opposition anyways. Sure, JDM can knock out your, Pete Rodriguez's, but Islam dominated that fight, looked great. Wasn't able to finish JDM, but still looked good in that fight, so I'm not really worried about that. But again, if we're going to go into tiers of knockout artists at 170, to me, there's a tier, and that A tier includes Prates and Michael Morales, in my opinion. Those are in their own tier. So there is that risk. If Islam fights Carlos Prates or Morales, he could get knocked out. What's his only knockout only loss in his career? Kind of, again, reveal my hand there. It was a knockout loss to Adriano Martins, over a decade ago. Now, I'm not saying that that's a guaranteed to happen, but there is that risk there. If Prates and Morales fight Islam, there is that, opportunity for them to potentially knock him out. And you look at how big Morales is, there's going to be a lot of power behind those punches too with Morales. Again, knocked out Sean Brady, right? So that's impressive. We already talked about the close fight with Gary. He already beat JDM. Sean Brady would be an interesting fight just in terms of, the wrestling. Brady's a great wrestler, but we know Brady's kryptonite to a certain degree is being, is the stand-up. Bilal Muhammad knocked him out. Morales knocked him out. That's somewhat of a kryptonite for Sean Brady. So that, again, that would be more of a wrestling fight similar to, say, Islam fighting Arman or something along those lines, right? That's where that style matchup comes in. Then you've got Gabriel Bonfim. Also has, I don't know if I put Bonfim in that same category as Prates and Morales, but he's pretty close there. Maybe a B tier as far as knockout power. But again, we saw Bonfim in that last outing. And of course, he's fighting Brady coming up here, and he could win that fight. Wouldn't put it past him. Just one loss there. Did knock out Randy Brown, beat Bilal Muhammad in his last fight. Didn't finish Bilal, but still has some sort of power as well, as we've seen more so earlier in his career. But more of a submission guy if we're talking about Bonfim. I only bring him up because he does have knockout wins, but I wouldn't, again, put him in that, category of like a real threat in the knockout department. And Gabriel Bonfim's not going to submit Islam Makhachev. I highly doubt that happens. And then after that, that's where things sort of fall off. You got a lot of older fighters here. Bilal Lewis, even if Buckley beats Malad, I wouldn't put him as a threat. Euros Medic, I think, has been on a very generous win streak. I don't really look at him as much of a threat. Actually, Medic's more of that B tier knockout power thing, but also Medic fighting some easier opposition here. And then you got Usman, et cetera, et cetera. So I think overall, I think some of these fights at 170 maybe aren't as big as some of the fights at 155. Like, I think name value wise, the names that I just mentioned here, Gaethje, Topuria, Saryukin, Oliveira, Holloway, Pimblett, Salkild, these names are a bit bigger than some of the names at 170. But I think as far as well-roundedness, the fighters at 155, I think, are more well-rounded than some of the guys that he could face at 170. Like, let's be honest here. He's going to be fighting either Prates or Morales next. I don't think there's much of a mystery there, right? But he's got to be careful. Those guys, again, can hit like a truck here. Saying that, though, I'll kind of double down again on my point here. I think Islam should stay at 170. But the part that Rogan's failing to mention in this clip here is the cut's really tough for him, right? And most of these fights are rematches. They're not fresh matchups. So I think for the fans are getting a better, fight here. So yeah, I personally think Islam should stay in this weight class and just fight a couple more times. I mean, look, if he gets past Prates and Morales, what else does he have to prove, really? Right? Do we really need to see a Sean Brady fight if he ends up getting to that point? Do we really need to see a Bonfim fight if he gets to that point? I don't know. We'll see. But I don't think Islam's got a ton of time left. And I think the Prates and Morales fights are big fights, not as big as some of the rematches you could have at 155. But yeah, I don't agree with Rogan here. And I don't even know if there's a guarantee he does what he's doing to these guys in that weight class. He will have a size and strength advantage that he won't have at 170, but that comes with the tough weight cut. So yeah, long story short, Islam should stay at 170, fight a couple more times, and then ride off into the sunset. So what's your thoughts on this? Do you want to see Islam go back down? I think once you go up, it's pretty hard to go back down again. There are fighters that have done it, but I just look at those weight cuts, especially towards the end at 155. I just think those are really tough. And also, I don't think Islam has to prove much. Like, if we're talking fresh matchups at 155, it's what? Gaethje, Topuria, Pimblett. I mean, there's a few, but there are some rematches in between there, like Oliveira, like Arman, all those fights too. So yeah, I think Islam should stay at 170. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. Appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.